We have Nidhi Gupta here today with us. Thank you so much for finding the time to talk about supply chain resilience and Red Sea situation and all that. Nidhi, you are the CEO and founder of Portcast. I've been reading about you a little bit, so I can say that you have more than 15 years of experience in the supply chain and logistics industry. If you can a little bit talk about yourself and introduce Portcast to our WOF community, it would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Barbara, for having me. Really excited to, talk about supply chains and how they are impacted by everything that's happening around the world. My background has been in logistics. I used to work for a large logistics company for a decade in business roles like management consulting, business development, and strategy, and then decided to start Portcast to look at how data and AI can help logistics become more efficient and resilient. So I happened to enter the logistics space, but I think it's been really exciting because there are so many opportunities and so many things that we can do better in this industry. So that's what's kind of kept me going.
So you're never bored, are you?
Yeah, yeah.
Especially,
There's always new risk, new situation, new technology.
right.
So I think there's a lot of I believe the industry is kind of constantly changing right now, and in the next 5 years it would look completely different.
Yes, it's like a never-ending process. I experience the same in my garden. It's the same garden, but it's always different. Same, but different. So, how about Portcast? It's an ocean transportation visibility platform. And according to your website, your vision or the vision of this project is to be the most trusted information source for effective and sustainable supply chains. So tell us a little bit about Portcast.
Yeah, so the sort of the dream that we have is that as supply chains become more and more intelligent and connected, and we will see sensing devices on every single supply chain asset, be it a ship, a plane, a container, a pallet, everything would start revealing data about themselves. And that's where an infrastructure layer which pulls data from all these assets in the supply chain would be important. And being able to say what data is just noise and what's actually meaningful. And that's where Podcast tries to play a role as well. How do we pull data from multiple places and make meaning from that data using machine learning and generative AI? And then that data starts being the foundation of finding optimization. How do we reduce cost and how do we reduce risk? Those are the two big questions for any manufacturer or any freight forwarder today. And that's where Podcast plays a role. So we focus on the ocean and increasingly the air part of the international transportation chain. And really, the forte is about how we can find the right data and use AI to make meaning of it.
All right. Thank you. Amazing. Okay, I'm really looking forward to hear your unique perspective, which is given by this intersection of the data and technology provided by Podcast and your personal knowledge. So let's use the situation and ask you a few questions. Obviously, the Red Sea topic, it's a huge thing. It's not really the newest in the headlines. Nevertheless, the situation has been ongoing, and to me, it seems like it is not settled yet. And the effects it has had on supply chains are especially the sea freight is really a major thing. Can you please share your opinion and give us maybe an overview of what the actual situation is? Are there, given the Red Sea crisis?
Yeah, so of course, it's very unfortunate what's happening in that part of the world. And because ships have been avoiding the Red Sea and going all around South Africa, that means more time that it takes for cargo to arrive. It means more cost because the ship has to basically sail for much longer. There's more fuel, the schedules are disrupted. And it also means more carbon emissions because we're actually spending more fuel, and that ultimately corresponds to at least twice the amount of carbon emissions that we would have had otherwise. Shipping anyway contributes to about 3% of the global emissions. So this situation is not really helping it. So in general, actually, if you look at this month and the last month, overall economic growth is actually picking up, which is good news. So in the European Union, in Canada, India, Japan, in general, the growth, the PMI is actually picking up. However, the geopolitical issues and the risk of the same, like the Red Sea situation and also the Russia-Ukraine situation, the risks are still quite high. And on top of that, we constantly have other situations happening. For example, the Baltimore incident where the ship, had an accident with the bridge. So there's constantly these risks that are impacting supply chains. One side effect of this that's happening in APAC is the empty container availability. That has become a problem because more delays are happening for cargo to arrive in the West. So for the empties to come back to Asia, where most of the empties are required and most of the manufacturing still happens, that's becoming harder. And that then impacts the rates. So there are rate hikes on almost all of the Asia outbound lanes. And that's due to increasing demand as we're entering into that season, but also because of the equipment challenges. And these are expected to continue at least into the summer. So that's broadly what we're seeing. So again, not the best favorable situation. So, the demand is fairly good. So the capacity is quite well utilized. But the rates are still on a high, and the equipment is on a shortage, especially in Asia.
So what are the indicators? What do you think the shipping lines will introduce? I mean, they applied different surcharges lately, given the situation. Do you think this will continue, or you think the situation is more settled and calm now, and everything is sort of under control, and in terms of the rates and the prices, for the forwarders?
Yes, I think there is the more risk, shortage of equipment, carbon emissions regulations. All of this correspond to higher rates, and that would correspond to surcharges that are to be applied. So there has already been sort of a war risk surcharge that came into effect from January of this year. Carbon emissions are going to be contributing to a cross-border surcharge as well, because most products which contain carbon will start to be taxed as they enter the European Union, at least. So there is an expectation of more surcharges coming in. So ultimately, we will see that the products that we are using will have higher costs, and therefore it makes it even more important to optimize how we are shipping stuff. Are we using the right routes? Are we using the right shipping carriers? The shorter routes, making sure that we are leveraging carbon emissions tools. So it's becoming more and more important to reduce that risk and cost in the supply chain.
Yes. Picking up on what you just mentioned about the alternatives, there has been other routes, the Arctic route questioned, and some potential investments trying to optimize the routes and cut the times, the delivery times, and also the shift to the rail and the combination between the air and sea freight. What's your opinion about this? Is this just maybe a temporary strategy, or do you think this will remain as a for the supply chain management to what's your opinion on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually think the trade routes are sort of evolving, and we will see new trade routes come up, and an evolution of which trade routes are heavier used than others, and maybe for the right reasons. For example, one of the things is a trend of nearshoring. So, having the factories much closer to where the demand is, that will have an impact on how much are we using the long distance routes and how much are we using the short distance routes, and the kind of mode of transportation we're using will have an impact because of that. So I think nearshoring will cause a change in the routes that we will see as being most important. Second, it's about these bottlenecks in shipping. So, for example, the Suez Canal, it's much talked about. We already talked about the Red Sea crisis a little bit, and therefore that bottleneck of shipping, or that hotspot, has to be diverted against. The same thing with Panama Canal. So there's a drought situation which is not getting better as summer is approaching, and that impacts the size of the ships that are going to be passing through the canal. And therefore, alternatives to the Panama Canal would have to be explored, and especially for the larger vessels. That has an impact. So all of these sort of hotspots that have been much used in the last decades in shipping, I think, are evolving. The rates of the Suez Canal, Panama Canal have been changing as well. So I think that has an impact on which routes companies will continue to use. And then I think the third thing is the multimodal aspect. So more and more customers are thinking about, how do we smartly move cargo around the world? Can we leverage ship plus air plus road plus rail routes? And even within the Asian continent, but also Asia to Europe, I think rail and trucking will constantly increase, and that will have an impact on the multimodal routes. And that's for the better as well. It would impact carbon emissions, it would impact lead times, it would also impact the risks that we're seeing. So, but yes, these routes are constantly evolving, and we will see newer routes becoming the top major routes in the world going forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, being in the shoe of a freight forwarder company, what would you recommend in terms of managing these crisis situations where you have the longer delivery times and the clients are not happy? Of course, the rates for you, the costs are rising, and you have to communicate this to your clients. Do you have any hints or tips how to navigate this for the freight forwarding companies, and maybe how they can even prepare themselves, or learn from some best case scenarios maybe?
Yeah, I think the good thing is that there is a lot more data today, and there's a lot more technology today. So the work that we have been doing manually and in Excel sheets, there is a very easy way to automate those processes, so that the freight forwarding talent can basically focus on more decision making, more value add, and be able to get more customers for the same time and effort that they have been putting into work. So I think there's an opportunity here to use tools and use sources of information. Broadly, I think there are two parts to sort of supply chain tools. The first is planning, and the second is management once the cargo is on the ships or on the planes. From a planning perspective, there are tools which can help us choose the right routes, choose the right shipping carriers, decide what routes and ships and ports to use based on what is more congested or what is likely to have higher risk, and how can we avoid those. What is not just cheaper, but what is going to be more reliable in terms of transit times and what is going to be more greener in terms of the carbon emissions. These are things and criteria to take into account in a very easy manner to decide what to actually do in terms of planning our supply chain. Most planning has been, either annual RFQs or multi-year sort of future planning. But I think now we have an opportunity to plan more dynamically, and this can change as risks and situations evolve. So that's, I think, one big bucket of tools. The second is, once the cargo has been put on a particular ship or plane, how do we know what's happening to it? And we don't necessarily need to see, if we have thousands of cargo moving around the world, what's happening to each of them. But we want to know where risk is. So if there are tools that can pinpoint out of these thousands of shipments, which are those 5 that have a problem, what is the problem? Why is that happening? Who is responsible for it? And can I actually do something about it? Can I reduce the risk? Can I reduce the cost? Can I tell my customer what's happening to this? And those are where tools and data sets exist. So I think broadly, these are 2 areas where smaller or mid-sized or even large freight forwarders can leverage technology and really focus on decision making more.
Absolutely makes sense. All right. You mentioned CO2 emissions. Also, Portcast is, one of the products is focused on CO2 emission management or calculations. I'm not sure how it works in reality, but what is it? What are the points that are crucial in terms of freight forwarding again to track CO2 emissions strategically? Because it's a huge, huge topic. Everyone is talking about sustainability, but how effective is it, and how pushy is it? How is it really necessary for the freight forwarding company, especially the smaller ones or the mid-sized ones, to adopt these kind of agendas? And is it mandatory? Is it still just an optionary thing? And
yeah. I think while sustainability and emissions control is in the focus of most companies, most manufacturers care about it from a scope 3 emissions reporting and optimization, and they have set themselves goals for how they reduce carbon emissions. While that is there, but I think the regulatory push is a bigger reason to adopt carbon emissions technologies. And European Union, with their ETS system, they are already taxing carbon related to shipping. And some of the large container shipping companies have already said that those costs would be passed on as surcharges to their clients, which are freight forwarders and even manufacturers directly, which means that it will start coming into the costs that freight forwarders are seeing. And it becomes a must-have to know if they're being charged correctly, what should they expect to be charged, how much emissions, how does it compare across different shipping companies, different routes? Can they choose that the companies based on the carbon emissions as well? Because now it's going to be a dollar value and not just emissions or sustainability targets. So I think it's becoming a must-have, especially in the European Union. We've been having discussions in some of the other countries, especially in Asia, where some of the developed markets here are also starting to think around the same philosophy. So I think it will increase. I think there will be more and more countries which will adopt the same regulations. The second thing is that so far the regulations have been aimed at the ship's emissions. But now there are regulations like the cross-border adjustment mechanism, the CBAM, which is about the product that's being shipped. So if we are shipping fertilizers or if we are shipping steel products into the European Union, the amount of carbon in those products is also going to be taxed, which means it directly impacts the cargo owners. And therefore, the freight forwarders will have to pass on this cost, this tax, to the cargo owners as well. So now there are regulations both on the ship that is coming into the European Union, but also the type of product that is coming and the carbon emissions associated with both of these. So what is really required is a foundation of how much emissions are we talking about? What is the emissions for the movement, the shipping or the air movement that we are doing? And that foundation then allows us to optimize this. That foundation is based on the type of ship, the type of cargo, the route that is being followed, whether it's going via anti-piracy zones, fuel change zones in the seas. All of these are data points that are used to calculate the carbon emissions in a certified manner that are acceptable by the IMO guidelines or the ISO guidelines. And that's exactly where the reporting comes into picture.
Wow, it's a really complex problematic. Okay, I hope that Portcast is one of the tools that can help out in this respect. So, what in terms of your tools that Portcast is providing? In what way of digitalization and maybe visions which way are you heading? What are the next steps for Portcast? Are you done for now, or do you plan to introduce some new features?
Absolutely moving and developing more and more features. Where we have been strong is to basically be able to capture data from shipping companies, from terminals, risks, and also data from our clients' ERP systems or TMSs, and be able to provide visibility on what's happening to any shipment. This is something we have been doing for ocean transport, and we recently launched for air transport as well. Where we are heading next is being able to ingest more documents as well. So unstructured data. Documents which could be contracts, which could be invoices, also news items from online sources in terms of what risks are happening, and then being able to use generative AI, which is specifically designed for this space, to be able to say where risk or cost issues can be identified. And that actually creates direct dollar savings into the bottom line, and helps avoid any charges which we should not be paying for, any SLAs which we are not meeting, and will let us have penalties. So that's where we're heading. So we are seeing quite good success rates in terms of the accuracy of the generative AI that we are using, how it reads documents, converts that into information, and finds optimization. And that's where we're going to be building more technology.
How about the booking platform? Are you planning to evolve into one of those as well?
So at the moment, we're focused on being a decision support platform. So we help take decisions based on information and data, and not really book the cargo. So we're not looking to compete with the freight forwarder, but enable them.
All right. Okay. Makes sense. All right. So for a smaller and mid-sized forwarding company, what are some of the other proficient tools out there available? What would you recommend to use for effective forecasting if you were in the shoes of a CEO of a freight forwarding company?
Yeah, I think, automated booking, I think that's definitely one of the things. Then deciding planning tools. So be it demand forecasting, how do I plan for how much demand will I likely have? And capacity allocation. So if I'm procuring certain capacity from carriers, am I using it in the most efficient manner possible as well, based on the demand? Picking the right schedules based on cost, time, and emissions. And then once this is done, being able to manage the transportation. So having the right visibility, having the right emissions reporting, being able to find optimization, and then finally figuring out where you should not be paying charges, where you can optimize any invoices, etc. So I think the entire workflow in forwarding can actually be digitized. and there are multiple tools in that. The most important thing I would say is integratability of these tools. So being able to bring different technologies together, but being able to let them talk to each other so that there is one system that a freight forwarder is looking at and they're not confused by multiple screens. So that integratability, I think, is very important to think through.
Certainly, yes. All right, thank you so much for answering my questions. Hope it wasn't too tiring, because I would like to give you the floor now, Nidhi, to show your presentation, maybe to give us more, like a visual picture about what Portcast is about, what you guys do, and how can you be helpful to the freight forwarders or other clients. So,
okay, all right. I'll try to keep it short, and hopefully, as the audience kind of appreciates it, then they can reach out for more questions. So let me share a screen. So what I would talk about is broadly three topics, and I think we touched on them in our conversation earlier as well. So the first is all the disruptions that are happening in supply chain, and why do we actually need predictability in the supply chain? The second is then, can data and AI actually help? What is it? And meaningfully or in examples, can we talk about how it actually helps supply chains? And then finally, for any company looking to get started on this, what are the first steps that they can take? So starting with the risks in the supply chain, I actually believe they are now a norm. It's not just if it would happen, if a risk would happen, but when a risk happens, are we basically ready to prepare against it, to deal with it? And we've seen risks from sort of cyclones and port congestions or strikes to very large situations like the geopolitical disputes and also regulations coming in. All of that has an impact in terms of the kind of capacity we have access to in shipping, the kind of transit times and costs that we will have to deal with, and also the customer expectations that we will be able to meet or not. And talking about the customers, they are now expecting a lot more from us. When we order something on Amazon or an e-commerce service, we know exactly when it's going to arrive in our house, and we expect it to arrive exactly at that time. And those same expectations are now being stretched to the entire supply chain, being able to know what's happening in the entire supply chain, not just the last mile. Having more traceability, having more pressures on costs, and finally, being able to digitize everything. As the younger generation starts entering supply chains in workforce, they are expecting the technology that we have to also be not just Excel based, but more digital. We're using more technology in our personal life, so why not at work as well? So customers and also employees that we are seeing, the workforce we're seeing, I think expect a lot more in supply chains. And yet, if we think about how our supply chains are managing this situation, there is still less resilience. There are so many parties or actors involved in the supply chain. There are so many handovers, and a lot of them are still black boxes. We don't know what happens to cargo when it arrives at a particular port. We don't exactly know, has it cleared customs? Has it any holes or charges? There are multiple transshipments or splits of bookings, and there are all these unforeseen events that we have to deal against. And that means if we can't deal with all these situations in a very dynamic manner, we are constantly firefighting. We have to deal with higher supply chain costs, more buffer inventory, last minute expediting of the cargo. And our customers are basically sort of not that happy that we are not keeping our promise, not delivering on time. And that leads to huge losses if we think about the supply chain globally. So what is it that data and AI can actually do? And what I can point to is specific examples of where data and technology can help. The first is knowing from a bird's eye view what's happening around the world, where are issues or risks happening. Here's a picture that I'm showing about congestion around the world. At any given point in time, it is possible to know which ports are congested, how much congested, how do they compare to the nearby ports, and is that situation likely to continue? The same kind of picture can be for other risks. It could be for cyclones, it could be for geopolitical risks, or it could be any other incident that's happening in shipping that is impacting transportation. Once we have that bird's eye view, we at least have information that we can relate to with our own supply chain. It then becomes important to really pinpoint if a particular shipment that my business cares for is actually impacted or not. And that's possible to do now. We can drill down into any single shipment. We can know what's the reason why it is stuck somewhere at a transit port. It is not arriving on time. We know why it is happening, who's responsible for it, and that allows us to start changing the planning in a more dynamic manner. The third thing that data and AI can really help on is what we talked earlier about carbon emissions. More and more regulations, especially in the European Union, are expecting not just the shipping companies, but also freight forwarders and cargo owners, in fact, to know what are the emissions, to be able to report them in an accurate manner, and then to start finding optimization and reduce the emissions and ultimately reduce costs. And that's again where data and technology can help in a very easy manner and sort of bring this visibility directly into any systems or reports that a company needs or uses. Another example is really all the manual invoicing checks that we're doing. Being able to ingest all the documents that exist in the business, be it the contracts, be it the invoices, being able to ingest that and be able to read it and say what is matching, what is not matching, and should we actually pay the charges? Would we actually meet the SLAs? That's something that technology and AI, especially generative AI, is able to help with now. So those were some of the examples in terms of how data and AI can help in terms of being more resilient. So the question then becomes, how can a small or a mid-sized freight forwarder really get started? What are the first steps that they have to take? So we believe the first step is really to get the data right. Bring the data from different public and proprietary sources, and it is possible to do that in a very simple way. There are APIs available to just plug this data in, or there are simple user interfaces available where all this can get done, and one can just get started in a few days. It does not even take weeks or months. This can also start pulling data from internal systems or even Excel sheets. So there's an ability to just drag and drop Excel sheets and get started. So it's very simple to start using technology now. Once the data or the foundation layer is there, the next thing is to really figure out what of this data is actually creating an exception, pointing to an exception. Where are issues related to cost? Where are performance issues? Or emissions issues. And that's where machine learning and generative AI can start helping. And finally, it's about how do you optimize it? How do you plan schedules going forward? How do you optimize for costs that have been billed to you? How do you plan your costs in a dynamic manner, changing your truck planning, changing your customs planning? And that's all what tools are available now, and it's very easy to get started on this. So what a company would be able to do then is have a bird's eye view on all of their shipments, being able to drill down into any single shipment, know why issues are happening, collaborate on it, share it with anybody in the company or even outside to a customer or supplier, being able to save freight costs in real time, but also for the last month or last year by actually having proper data that can be compared against. Be able to plan the future supply chain, the next months or next year's supply chain much better by learning from what's happened in the last few weeks or months, and be able to measure what kind of carbon emissions are happening so that we're compliant in the supply chain. And that's where Portcast plays a role on. And I'd be happy to discuss more with anybody who's interested looking at this.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. It was certainly enlightening for myself and hopefully for the community as well. I'll be happy to share this information. It is definitely interesting to see the evolution of how the digitalization is really helping to utilize the data and use them in a more professional management. So thank you for your efforts and contribution to the industry. I hope to see you in person at one of our WOF events, and hope we stay in touch, and wish you best of luck with all your endeavors.
Absolutely. Thank you, Barbara, for having me.